Ohana Chapter 5. Knuckles set a plate down where he was standing on a step stool in front of the sink helping Maddie do the dishes after dinner, staring off into distance and his hands stilling in movement. His spine prickled, tail and nose twitching as his eyes flicked out into the lit backyard, watching the shadows. His sixth sense was tingling, the one that was connected to the Master Emerald and the element of Chaz, and it danced along his fur like lightning. The signature wasn't familiar, not in the way Sonic's and Tails were, and he knew they were in the den with Tom playing some kind of human contraption that didn't interest him.
Sweetie.
The word snapped him out of the trance that the signature had him under, making him look up at the human woman who was touching him gently with a degree of concern on her face.
Is everything okay?
Something's wrong.
He grunted out, placing his towel on the bench, and stepping off the step stool, heading over towards the door and out before he could be stopped. He vaguely heard her ask questions as he bounded out onto the lawn, and Knuckles' eyes widened when he felt the hum of the Master Emerald vibrate like he'd never felt it before, as though it was alerting someone to its presence, before he could make his way to the shed. Though, the doors were open and the brilliant green glow of the Master Emerald lit up the backyard, causing him to shield his eyes as the rest of the Wachowskis came up to him.
I do that right on the eyes.
He heard Tom mutter, barely glancing at them as he bolted in the direction of where he had been keeping the emerald all this time. His gloves were in his bedroom, but that was the furthest thought from his mind. His hands were going to be more than enough to strangle the intruder for touching his emerald.
So this is where you've been.
The voice made him halt a few feet from the stranger, hands on the earth and knees bent in a crouched position as Knuckles' eyes landed on them, his free faltering in something akin to disbelief and shock. They weren't talking to him, rather the emerald that they had effortlessly plucked from the security device that Tails had created for it. For a moment, the Echida's words failed him as he relaxed his battle position, watching the other one turn to look at him.
Knuckles!
Father.
What, no way?
Sonic stepped between the two of them, leaning in to take in the features of the older Echida who didn't spare him a glance, and made to move back before he was caught by the neck and quills.
Okay. Let him go.
Tom demanded, reaching for the holster on his belt as Maddie took hold of Tails by the shoulders and moved him back. The gun would probably be pretty useless, having seen what Knuckles and Sonic were capable of. He had no idea what an older Mobian could do, but it gave him peace of mind.
Who is this guy? What is he doing on my family's property?
I came looking for the Master Emerald when I sensed that it had moved dimensions.
Green eyes flickered from Knuckles to the humans and Kit, then to the hedgehog struggling against his grasp.
Then it vanished from my mind. Very good, son.
Knuckles seemed to flush and pull back like he'd been punched, recoiling slightly towards Maddie's direction. His fingers dug into his arms as he crossed them, huffing, and keeping his eye on the older Echida.
It was Tails' idea.
His footing shifted as his father turned to glimpse at the Kit who looked like he was baring his teeth at him from next to the female human.
Doc, let him go. He's harmless.
That's a lie. I can feel pure chaos energy radiating from this one.
The Echida shook Sonic cruelly as he clawed at the hand holding him in the air.
If I didn't know any better, I'd wager.
His gaze flecked to Knuckles.
That you cared about this abomination.
Knuckles gritted his teeth.
I don't.
Now, Knuckles.
Sonic let out a sharp cry when claws buried themselves in his shoulders, blue lightning dancing across his fur and his family tensed, Maddie yelling something that missed his ears.
I told you never to lie to me. That's twice now.
And I said let him go.
A breeze blew through the garden as Knuckles' own Cho's energy crackled around him, closing the distance between them in a matter of seconds, and wrapping his own hand around the wrist of the one that held the hedgehog up. Surprised by the sudden action, the Echidna relinquished his grip, turning the attack back on Knuckles as Sonic placed a paw to his neck and skidded away from the two of them. Watching warily, they seemed to exchange side words, a light grin crackling around the elder before he smiled in a way that unnerved Tom.
You've gotten stronger, son.
No thanks to you.
A fist closed itself and went for his head, only for his father to duck underneath it and send him flying across the garden with a blast of energy to land in some azaleas he had been carefully taking care of for the past however long. Knuckles landed in the soil with a grunt, dreadlocks tousled and heart-pounding in his ears as he heard distant shouts of his name. He sat up, shaking dirt and flowers off his head as he pushed himself up, Red Cho's energy crackling around his fists and burning his fur without his gloves to protect him.
Why?
What?
Hands clashed, Cho's energy arching over them as they grappled each other. Knuckles ground his teeth together, purple eyes glaring.
Why did you leave?
My job was done. I passed on my duties.
He tilted his head, throwing the boy to the ground again in a way that caused the earth to crack.
What's so hard to understand, boy?
The Echidna cracked his neck, watching his son pick himself up again.
Then why come back?
Knuckles launched himself forward out of the small crater, claws digging into the dirt where he landed and growling.
Why come back at all?
Did you not hear me earlier?
He moved backward, towards the Master Emerald's brilliant glow and pressing his paw to it, seemingly glowing a light pink. And dreadlocks seeming to float around his head, he smirked at his father over the gemstone, mocking.
I guess it chooses me.
Fine.
Holding his burned paw close, he leaned down to pick up the ring that he dropped, glaring at his son before turning his attention towards the humans.
You can have him. He was always good for nothing.
The ring faded as the words stung in Knuckles' head. They told him to leave the garden for tomorrow. But Knuckles couldn't sleep. The Master Emerald locked away safely in his basement bedroom for now. His fingers picked at torn-up azaleas, gently checking which were fine and the ones that weren't placed at his side for now. His eyes strained in the early morning moonlight, dirt curling under his hands as he adamantly patted down soil and returned the lawn to its previous state or tried to at his very best. The earth was comfort, the earth was stable. When Tom stepped outside with his morning cup of coffee and saw the Echidna knee-deep in the flower patch, a frown of concentration on his face and dirt smeared over his cheeks, he took pause. Maddie had been dealing with Knuckles the most out of them, getting him settled in and comfortable, while Tom had been dealing with Sonic and Tails. The boys were excitable and happy to talk while Knuckles was more subdued, more guarded, and honestly, he felt like keeping them occupied had helped with the Echidna's confidence around the house, in the family. It was funny to think of them all like that.
Hey, Jim.
Tom saw the way Knuckles stiffened at his voice, sliding hand into his pocket as he stepped onto the lawn.
What are you doing out here this early in the morning?
Stupid question.
What about you?
Knuckles quipped, patting the earth down around the flowers that he had replanted, dreads hiding his face.
That's a fair point.
He mumbled around his coffee, taking a sip and coming to stand off to the side, crossing an ankle over the other.
An early riser comes with the job.
Tom looked at Knuckles, who was now sitting back on his haunches, hands on his knees.
Couldn't sleep.
The Echidna shook his head, and in the early morning twilight Tom could see he had even cleaned up his scrapes from the fight that had broken out last night.
Can't blame you.
Maddie had told him of the 2 or 3 times Knuckles had mentioned a father before climbing up and either changing the subject or dropping the point and falling silent. He seemed like a strong guy, and in his job, Tom had met his fair share and could tell what a person was like just from a few sentences. He crouched down next to Knuckles but still an arm length away, mug warming his hands in the cooler of the morning. There was joy between them before Knuckles spoke, voice gruff.
I should have gone with them. The Master Emerald belongs on Angel Iceland and I need to be with it.
It seems to me like it made its own mind up about where it belongs.
Tom added unhelpfully, unknowingly voicing what Knuckles was thinking.
What was that you guys were talking about last night? Case and all that.
Knuckles hesitated, fingers brushing against the blades of grass underneath him as he let out a small sigh.
It's a ritual. It taps into the energy of the Master Emerald in the Guardian's Fable. We both held guardianship over it, but it chose me for some reason.
Then I'll guess it thinks you know what you're doing.
Tom would have believed himself 12 months ago, talking to an alien Echidna about a gemstone like it had feelings. He looked down into his mug, then took a swig of coffee.
You know, and then to prove of me becoming a cop.
Knuckles seemed to be interested in that, turning his head slightly to look at Tom for the first time since he'd come out into the backyard.
I used to fight him out, but I was pretty adamant about doing what I wanted.
Really?
It wasn't like Knuckles exactly knew what a cop was, or why it was so bad, but he couldn't stop himself from sounding invested in what Tom was telling him.
Oh yeah, then again, he didn't approve a lot of things I did.
Tom stretched the back of his neck with his free hand.
I guess that was the tip of the iceberg because I came home from the academy to find my things had been packed up and were in boxes on the curb.
The Echidna shifted his gaze to the garden, then down at his dirty hands, his thoughts crowded in his head, clamoring at him like claws digging into his skin. He thought about Maddie patching up Sonic, who played off his injuries like it was nothing, but Knuckles knew the full extent of the Cho's energy that his father had used. It messed with the hedgehogs, and he knew the other Mobian would be off for a few days before it sapped itself out of his system.
Why am I never good enough?
The words were out before he could stop them, fingers curling into fists and slamming into the ground underneath him, startling Tom.
I should have stopped him from hurting Sonic. I should.
A gentle hand touched his head and startled him, causing him to look up at the taller human. Tom's eyes were concerned before he smiled, hand dropping to squeeze Knuckles' shoulder.
You did what you could. Sonic's fine, he'll shake off. What matters is you protected us, and that's enough.
He thought he could see tears pricking the edges of the teenager's eyes. Knuckles turning his gaze away to huff lightly and rub at the corner.
I should have done more.
He grumbled, drawing himself up and whipping a hand across his face, causing more dirt to smear on his cheeks.
Your dad, he'll be back.
Just one more problem we gotta have to deal with together.
Tom stood from his crutch position, letting his hand slide, and come to rest on his hip as he drank from his coffee mug.
What's his name?
Knuckles looked at him puzzled before he responded.
Look.
You should try calling his name to his face next time.
Tom grinned mischievously.
See how he likes it.
The Echidna looked at him weirdly.
And if he doesn't, I've got your back, and so does Manny and Sonic and Tails. But your family not that douche.
He turned his gaze towards the azaleas, already starting to look like they were snuggling back down into the earth as though they had been ripped from their bed.
Thank you.
Don't mention it, kid. How about some breakfast now?